Hello, I'm Barb Owen of HowToGetCreative.com, and today I'm going to answer the question, what is ink? Now, this is a great big subject and it could go on for a long time. So we're just going to do kind of an overview of some of the kinds of ink that I have here in my studio. So here is probably the most common thing you think of when you think of ink, right? It's just a plain old pen, a ballpoint pen. Well, this particular pen is really a good one to have in your creative space. This is called a crystal or crystal. I'm not sure how they want you to pronounce it. It's C-R-I-S-T-A-L. It's a Bic pen. Now, why would you want a Bic pen in your creative space? Well, because it writes over acrylic paint. See that? It just writes over it beautifully. So you can, because this is acrylic scraped paint that I scraped into my journal and just extra stuff. And so if you want to write words, if you want to journal about things, it's easy to do. So any Bic pen, in my experience, is a great addition to have inside your creative space. So ballpoint pen, great thing to have. Another thing when you think of pens are gel pens, gel inks. And here are a few of them. This is a Crystal Star pen. These are Jelly Roll pens. This is a white Jelly Roll. This is a white Uniball Signo pen, this one. It's a broad tip. These others are narrower points. There are other kinds of inks that are glimmer inks called, this is a Stardust Jelly Roll. This has a glimmer, glittering colors, it says. It's a meteor shower of glittering colors, so there you go. But it has a glimmer, a reflective quality in the ink. There are some inks like the Moonlight, the Jelly Roll Moonlight pens that will show over dark paper. I'll show you that in a second. And here's another one. Anything that is labeled with the Moonlight on it, in my estimate or in my experience, will work on darker color paper. And it tells you right here, writes on dark paper. There are also classic. This is a different ink formulation. This is waterproof, chemical resistant. It does not say anything. It says ice cream smooth, but it doesn't say anything about writing over dark paper. So I will show you an example of that in a second. And then you can get the metallic Jelly Roll pens also. These are different than the Stardust pens or the glittering crystal or the crystal clear star. So these are different. This is a metallic. This is a different formulation, has a different look. So let me show you what some of these inks look like when colored on dark paper. So this is a piece of just plain, it's a scrap, as you can see, of black cardstock. And I'm going to show you up close what these look like. Let me rearrange here just a quick second. All right, so here are the inks. Some examples of these inks. This is the white Jelly Roll pen. So this is a narrower point. This one is the Signo Uniball pen. Now I've written over it a couple of times, so that's why it has the messy, kind of a messy look about it. This is a broad tip. You can see the difference in these. And also I hope you can see the difference in the color of the intensity of the white ink. It's just different effects for different purposes. This is the metallic Jelly Roll pen. You can see how very intense that color is, and if you tip it in the light, when it's in your real life studio, you're going to actually see the metallic quality of it. These are the Stardust pens, the Stardust Jelly Rolls. They are very glittery and highly reflective, but you can see the difference between the glitter or the metallic pen and the Stardust pens. There's quite a difference in the way that the ink looks. This is the Clear Star pen. It is similar to the ink that is in the Stardust pens, but it's a little more highly reflective in when I use it. That's what I think of it. And then these are the Moonlight pens right here, the ones that say they write on dark paper, which in fact they do. And then down here you can see where it says Classic Jelly Roll. That is how the classic Jelly Roll pens look on dark paper. You just can hardly see them. So the moral of that story is that you want to test out the pens, test out the inks so that you know how they're going to behave on the surface that you're writing on. So always do a test. All right, so let me again rearrange myself just a little bit. Next, we're going to talk about felt tip pens, the ink that are in felt tip pens. So there are things like highlighters, and these are the Sharpie accent highlighters. They come in a wide variety of colors, and these can be used obviously to highlight books and print and that kind of thing. Here it's a wedge tip, so it makes it easy to highlight over a line of text and so forth. But these can also be used in your art journals. They can be used for adding color to things, which is really super nice. They are you'll have to, it depends on the surface that you're working on as to how permanent they are. So always, always, always test. But don't overlook highlighters, because you get this wide variety of color range in many of the highlighters. So highlighting ink is a great ink to have on hand. You can get water-based inks. This happens to be the Letraset neon markers. These are water-based. Let's see. Somewhere in here it says, in fine print, it says water-based ink. Now, water-based and water-soluble are not necessarily the same thing at all. So again, test your marking ink on the surface that you intend to work on, because sometimes they will blend with water and sometimes they won't. If they're water-based, I find they have no odor, and that's common because it's not a solvent. So they don't, if you have problems with fumes from things, then a water-based marker or ink is going to be a better choice for you, more than likely. There are also fabric-based inks, or markers or ink that is safe to use on fabric. This is one of them. This is tulip fabric markers. Another one that is safe to use on fabric, that is easy to use, is the stained Sharpie marker. So both of these are meant to use on fabric, and they are ink in a felt tip marker. See if you can see that. So it's got kind of a brush point on the end of this marker, makes it really nice for working with fabric. The tulip fabric marker has more of a bullet tip. So there's a brush tip and a bullet tip. So they're two different points, but they are both safe to use on fabric. And if you follow the instructions, they are going to be permanent fabric markers. So the ink that is in both of these is permanent on fabric. So always read your instructions. Sometimes things will tell you to heat set. Sometimes they will tell you to put them in the dryer. Sometimes they just tell you to let them sit and cure for a certain period of time. So you have inks that will work on fabric. Another ink that will work on fabric is the Pigma Micron. And this works, this happens to be the brush point. So this is a very fine brush tip, as opposed to the Sharpie. Get one of those out here real quick and show you, just so you can compare them. So here is the Sharpie brush tip. So you can see there's quite a bit of difference. And let me show you that a little bit closer so you get a little better, a little greater comparison of those two. So you can see that there's a lot greater tip on the stained marker than there is on the Pigma Micron, or the Pigma brush. It's not Micron, it's a Pigma brush marker. So both of these are safe for use on fabric. Now the Pigma pens come in other tip sizes as well. These are the Pigma Microns. These are safe for paper and for fabric. And these come in, well, that one, the tip is almost gone on. Can you tell I use these a lot? We'll take a big fat one. So these come, now this is by Pigma Micron standards, this is a big fat tip. This is this is an 08. That's a big fat tip. But the ink in these works, let's find another one here. This is an 01. So we'll compare the 01 and the 08. See the difference in those tip sizes? But this ink is safe on fabric and permanent on fabric. So a lot of quilters use this for writing their labels on their quilts, and that works very well for those applications. Okay, so those are some fabric inks. You also have solvent-based ink, and an example of the solvent-based ink is the Copic marker. So this is a Copic sketch marker. It's a double-pointed marker. It has a wedge tip at one end. It has a brush tip at the other. Now, Copic markers are created in several different ways. The sketch markers are the ones that I happen to have. I don't have very many of them. I don't use them a lot. These are they're very strong as far as the fumes or the odor. So again, if you don't like having things that are real fumey or odorous, then you might just need to be aware of that. Another permanent solvent ink is the Sharpie. And this is not the fabric Sharpie, this is the regular Sharpie permanent marker. And these also have some aroma to them, or maybe to some people they just plain flat stink. But they come in wonderful colors, as do the Copic markers. There's a wide variety of colors that these solvent markers come in. They do not dissolve with water. They're not necessarily permanent on fabric. So if you're going to work on fabric, you need to use the fabric markers. They are permanent. They work great in your journals, but they do not like to write over acrylic paint. They will clog up and dry out and whatever over acrylic paint. So just don't ruin your Sharpies trying to write over acrylic paint in art journals. All right, and we have another kind of ink that's kind of interesting, and that is the friction pen. This comes in different colors. The three that I have are black, red, and blue. These can be used on fabric or paper, doesn't matter. So I have a piece of fabric here, and this is a ballpoint, and the way these work is that this pen holder, the clip, pulls down to expose the pen tip. I know that may seem totally obvious to you guys, but I could not figure out how to make these things work. I know, I'm slow that way sometimes. But you can make marks on your fabric, and let's say you want to mark placement for some stitching pattern or something, and so I want to mark that. I can use this ink and I can make these marks like this, okay? Or let's say maybe I wanted to just try out a quilting design or a free motion stitching design. Let's say I wanted to see if my name would fit within a given space. So I go like that and I go, oh, it's not big enough. Well, rats. So I'll try it again, and this time I'll make it bigger, and so I can try things out like that, right? And then to release to put the pen away, to retract it, you pull down and let go. Okay, so you are doing this with the pen, the clip. Okay, so here it is, you're pulling down and then retract it. Okay, so let's say I want to play a little bit more with this, and let's say I'm just playing with the placement of designs and and I was trying to figure out about some free motion quilting design that, how would it work in a given space and that kind of thing. So that's in red, and maybe I want to use a different color for something else. But now I'm finished with it and I want to get rid of it. Well, the way you get rid of it is you use a heat gun. And you could probably use an iron as well. I didn't try it with an iron, but it is a heat reactive ink. And so you can use this on paper or fabric. And now the one thing about paper I want to caution you about, and that is on paper, you don't want to write, you don't want to press too heavily, because you can actually dent the paper using that pinpoint. And if you dent the paper, you're gonna leave an impression. And I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this, but let's take a look at it, see if you can. Right in here, I've written on this with the friction ink. I'm going to see if I can tip it enough that you can see it right there. So I've written on it, and then I used the heat gun on it, and so I got rid of the ink, but I pressed hard enough that I dented the paper. So just because you get rid of the ink may not get rid of the impression that you left from the pinpoint. So just be aware of that. So these are heat reactive. This is a heat reactive ink. Kind of fun, has some cool applications. You can play around with those. Think of all the different things you can do with that. I have some really interesting ideas running around in my head. So yeah, upcoming classes, I'll be using those over at HowToGetCreative.com. This is another kind of ink. This is air soluble. This ink dissolves with air over time. So I'm just going to put a couple of things in here. I use this a lot when I'm sewing to mark things and, to give me spacing and, just to use for all different kinds of detail things that I need a temporary marking of some kind. So if you let these just sit, they will disappear with humidity, which is the good and the bad thing. If you live in a real humid area, this is going to disappear very quickly. You also can remove the marks with water. So they will go away with air or with water. So they'll go away over time, or you can actually remove them using water. So that's an air-soluble marker. There is also a blue one that is a water-soluble ink. I don't tend to use that one as much. I don't know how they work now compared to what they used to, but a few years ago that ink would set if you hit it with an iron. You had to remove the ink first before you ironed it. And so I tended not to use that one. I tended to always go with the purple one because I didn't have to worry about that issue. Okay, let's talk about ink in stick form. This is a set of Inktense blocks, and these are inks that are formulated into blocks just like this. Okay, this is a very small set of these. They come in much larger sets, but you can pick up this ink using a water brush, and then you can apply it to whatever you want to, whatever your project is. Once this is dry and fully set, then it is going to be permanent on your projects. Now, the one caveat to this product is that all of the ink has to be dissolved. If you don't have all the ink dissolved and you come back over it with something wet, it will activate whatever is left. So you do want to make sure that you activate all of the ink that comes in a stick called Inktense. There is another form of this, and that is in pencil form. So here's one of the sets in pencil form. And again, this comes in different kinds of sets, and different numbers of colors and so forth. In this, you write on a piece of paper. So you have a little more detailed control, but you write with this, and then use your water brush and you can activate the ink. I often use my water brush and pick up the ink right from the tip of the pencil as well. So there's different ways to do that. And this is just a piece of cardstock, so it's not going to show well. If you use watercolor paper, it works much better, or mixed media paper. But same thing, you must liquefy that ink completely. And if you do, when it dries, it is going to be permanent. And that is, and the colors are very intense, which I love. I'll show you a couple of examples of the ink tints, using the ink tints pencils and blocks. Here's one example. So this is ink tints used on watercolor paper. Here's another example of ink tints used on watercolor paper. And another. And some of these could be the blocks, not just the pencils. And yet another. So you see the very, you get a beautiful blend. It's a possibility of blending, working with the pencils and blocks. And but yet when I went back over, show this to you a little closer. When I went back over the ink with the white pen, this is the white Jelly Roll pen here and here. You can see that that white pen stayed nice and white. You can see the white dots in here. So the pen stayed nice and white, and that's because the ink below it was completely dissolved and dried. Okay, so that shows you some examples of ink that comes in either a pencil or a block. There's also some drawing inks. So we're going to take a look at drawing inks. These are permanent waterproof India inks, and these are most commonly used with dip pens or fountain pens. And these are wonderful inks to use. They are permanent when dry. Here's another ink called, this is all-purpose ink. This is made by the company Sukiniko. I have it. This is going to be a little hard for you to see, but I'll show it to you this way. This comes in a set. Comes different ways. You can get individual colors, but I have this little holder that holds my little pots of ink. And these sticks, these are Fantastics, they're called. And these sticks are used to dip into the ink and then apply the ink to whatever surface I'm using. You do want to use one stick per color, and they come in different configurations. They have a bullet point, or also more, this is more of a brush tip. It has a pointed end, so you can get the Fantastics in different configurations there, and you can buy them in packages like this to use with your different inks. But these are tiny little pots of ink, and they are suitable for all porous surfaces such as paper, fabric, wood, leather, and many others. So, but it is ink, and you can tell by the consistency when you look at the bottle. When you just shake the ink around, it's very, very thin. It is. There is a big difference between paint and ink in the consistency, and very highly concentrated. You can do some beautiful things with the Sukiniko ink. Let's see, what else we're going to talk about. Let's talk about acrylic inks. Let's talk about these inks first. These are spray inks. These are the Dylusions, and these are water soluble. These are ink sprays, and all of these particular ones by this company, this brand Dylusions, are highly water reactive. So these never, ever, ever are completely sealed unless you seal them with something, with a sealer of some kind. These are always going to react. If you get them wet, whether it's with water or paint or gesso or whatever, these are always going to react. Highly water soluble, highly water reactive. as are the distress products, the distress stains. These are highly reactive. These have a dauber top as opposed to a spray top. You can also get the distress products in a spray stain, also highly reactive. So those inks are very highly reactive to water. Now, if you want something that is not so highly reactive, then you need to start out with something that is not so reactive to water. And that's where you use acrylic inks. Now, there are a couple of companies, a couple of brands of these that I have. One is F&W or FW. FW, I guess it is, by Daler Rowney, FW Acrylic Artist Inks. Also the Liquitex inks. So all of those are acrylic inks, and if you choose to make those into sprays, which is what I've done here, I've taken water and I have put some of those acrylic inks. This one happens to be this Waterfall. I believe that's the color that I used here. I just love it when they put the price sticker right over the color and stuff, right? This is Waterfall green, and I put 7 droppers. I write it on the label, 7 droppers of the acrylic ink in here, and you can see it settles to the bottom, so you got to make sure you shake it up before you spray it. And then when this is sprayed and dried, this is permanent. And this one is the Liquitex Gold, so it's one of these Liquitex inks, same thing, so many droppers, sprayed into the water and shake it up, spray it. When it dries, it is permanent. Now, you don't have to dilute these at all. So, for example, these are in my art journal, and these are acrylic ink. This is over a background of jelly plate printed deli wrap. And that's what's the background. So that's collage, a whole bunch of collage deli wrap papers. And then this is done by just taking the ink, the dropper that's attached to the lid, and painting with the dropper. So that is acrylic ink. And here is another one, same thing. Same exact process. So both of these have been created using the acrylic inks and just using the dropper that's attached to the lid. Instead of a brush, it's just painting with the dropper. So that is how those were created. So in that case, the acrylic ink is straight from the bottle. All right, so that takes care of that. Let's talk a little bit about ink pads. So there are different kinds of ink pads available on the market. I'm going to show you just 3 different kinds. There's distress ink, which we've discussed a little bit over here using the ink that is in the dauber bottles. This is the ink that comes in an ink pad. The distress inks are always going to react, always. So this is highly water reactive. So distress ink will always react. If you get it wet, years down the road, it's still going to react. So water reactive ink. Then there's archival ink. Archival ink is permanent. When it dries, it's permanent. So if you want to stamp an image and have it stay there for a long time, and you want to be able to paint over it, for example, archival ink is a good choice because it's permanent. Then there are solvent-based inks. So this is Stays On. Comes in a couple of different ways that they put the ink into pads, these little ones, which are nice because they will clip together, and so it's easy to stack them up, or they come in these big pads. These have an odor, and but they are permanent, but they are reactive only with a solvent of some kind. So this is solvent-based ink. And let's see, I want to talk just a tiny little bit about these felt tip pens. We were talking about felt tip pens earlier, and I forgot to drag out the Pitt big brush pens. These come in this particular ink comes in different ways, different kinds of markers. You can get this ink, they call it Indian ink. and you can get them in small brush pens. I also have them in the big brush pens. It's the same ink in 2 different tip sizes, 2 different markers. And when this is dry, it is permanent. The Pitt pen ink is also put into just small felt tip pens. So these are just marker tips. They're not the brush pens. So you can get it in different ways. When it's dry, it is permanent. So a couple of examples of the intensity and the beauty of those Pitt markers. This is done, most of this was done with the smaller brush tips. Some of these are with the bigger brush tips and the paper's curled a little bit. But you can see how very intense they are. So those colors in those felt tips, that particular ink is really, really bright and intense and beautiful. So that is the Pitt pen marker ink. And one last ink I want to talk to you about that I have out here is the alcohol ink. And there's some different, couple of different brands here that I want to show you. There is the Ranger Adirondack line. These are alcohol inks. This brand over here is from Jacquard. This is the Pinata alcohol inks, and these are very odorous. You need to know that. So if you have any issue with odors, you need to know that this is highly stinky, let's say. And so you want to work in a well-ventilated room. These both smell differently, so the solvents must be a little different from one to the other. But they are wonderful. They're brilliant colors. They're incredibly intense in the color. They work on non-porous surfaces. It's what they're best at. Of course, you can push the limits of anything. And believe me, I've done my fair share of that. Okay, I'm looking around to see if I have any other inks to show you. I don't see any other things, so hopefully that gives you kind of an overview of what is ink. This is by no means an exhaustive supply or an exhaustive list of all the kinds of inks that there are. These just happen to be the ones that I had available in my studio, and I thought I would give you just kind of an overview of water-based, water-soluble, permanent, blah, blah, blah. So hopefully that has answered the question. Maybe it's raised more questions than I answered. If it did, leave them in the comment section below. And hopefully I've given you some information that's helpful. I'm Barb Owen from HowToGetCreative.com. If you've enjoyed this little video, thank you so much for watching, and please come over to HowToGetCreative.com and check us out. We're a membership website. We have all different kinds of classes on a wide variety of creative arts subjects, and we would love to have you come over and check us out. Until next time, remember to get creative today, because you know it's easy, and I'll see you next time.